The fourth tension I want to talk about is between military and civil interests. So we have territory. We know how the territory will be administered. We know how we're going to recruit officials to govern the territory. But what do we do with all the resources that come into the state, that come into the center, or even come into the regions? And here I think there's a great division between military versus civil interests. By this we mean that, very simply, that military interests tend to be the concern with investing in the army, investing in military power. In the Chinese case, it often means expanding territories. And in fact, we see the Han Dynasty expanding in all directions at various points. The civil interests are interests in doing things like investing in roads, in canals, reducing taxes, letting people take home more money, letting them spend it on themselves. The Qin Dynasty, we know, never let military interests become subordinate to civil interests. It was a mobilization state meant for war. The Han, when it takes over, backs off from that position. The first reigns, well, the emperor tries at one point in the first reigns to launch campaigns against the northern tribal people. Fails, says, enough of that. The first couple reigns are benign neglect, if you will. The government gets its revenue, and the people get richer. But there's a certain moment at which government has money to spend, too much money, and it hasn't been spending it. And very often, governments think about military power and extending its authority and extending its territories and fighting its enemies. And this happened in Han. By the reign of Emperor Wu, the treasuries were rich. The great historian of the time, Sima Qian, who you'll meet a bit later, says the grain was turning red with mildew in the granaries, and the ropes that held the strings of cash together were rotting. So much unexpended surplus was there. And under the reign of Emperor Wu, the court takes up policies of expansion. If I look at this map now, you can draw arrows going into Korea, into Vietnam in the south, but also to the southwest, along towards Burma, through the high mountains and deep valleys, along what would later be called the Burma Road. North against the Xiongnu, to the northwest, into the desert areas. Far into the west, expeditions are sent. At first, they're very successful. But once you've launched military campaigns, you have to maintain them. The troops were now in garrisons far away. And all of a sudden, that surplus that was in the granaries and treasuries was gone. And at that point, the Han needed more revenue. We'll come to that problem in a later module. The balance between civil and military interests can shift very easily. In my own country, in the United States, I remember the day before classes in 2001, September 11th, 9/11 as it's known, right? And the trade centers, the two great towers, the World Trade Center in New York City, were attacked. And within a week, the country had changed from a focus on the civil, giving taxes back to the wealthy, relaxing all sorts of restrictions, to a military focus of going to war, of finding who had done this. Things can change quickly when it comes to policy, civil and military policy.